I really was not a virulent anti-Semite at all. I think that I approached it very surface level, and I thought, there are people suffering. It does seem like in these university settings, if Israel would just go away, everything would be better. And to not, it's a shameful thing, but you don't understand that is a very old anti-Semitic trope that you're sort of internalizing through the university environment. And I didn't know very many Jewish people, so all I hear is this one thing about the state of Israel, and then I don't ever really have too many Jews in my life to tell me otherwise. Like, it just sort of instantly becomes this litmus test for, are you educated? Are you smart? Are you empathetic? Are you worldly? It's like, what's your opinion on Palestine? The theme of losing friends and feeling as if like your political ideology has fallen out from under your feet. Like, these are all things I felt and I see written about very, very frequently.
Imagine being part of the pro-Palestine, anti-Zionism movement and then changing your mind. Michal Adva joins me in this fascinating discussion about what drew her into this movement initially and how she turned her back on this philosophy. Now she's not only completely shifted her perspective, but is also planning on marrying her fiance, who was also an anti-Zionist Jew. Michal shares what drew her into pro-Palestine, anti-Zionism, what made her question this way of thinking. She gives insight into what she was thinking while she was in this advocacy movement, and what ultimately led her to question it and change her mind. I met Michal through her and her fiance's joint Instagram page, Two Jews, Infinite Opinions, and she agreed to join me on an interview to share her journey.
And I love what you have to say. You've got a really unique perspective. But first of all, I want to know how you came up with the page, because I understand you share it with your husband? Boyfriend?
Yeah, fiance, almost husband. I mean,
Congratulations.
Thank you. He actually was the one who came up with the idea. I truly was just along for the ride, and he's like, I'm gonna make some little funny memes, and that was mostly him at first. And then I sort of thought about it, and I thought, we do have this sort of really unique life experience. He was born Jewish, but has never been truly deeply immersed in the community, and from the age of consciousness was always sort of anti-Zionist, leaned that direction. And then I grew up with no religion, no awareness of Jews, nothing. And then I came to college, started studying Arabic, sort of, which I enjoyed and I have mixed feelings about today, but definitely went down the anti-Zionist sort of like thought rabbit hole. And then together we met, and together came to the conclusion that was, not the path for us anymore, and had a lot of clarity, especially post October 7th.
So how does one go from believing in anti-Zionism to realizing it's a whole bunch of BS?
Yeah, I thought about this recently, and I actually had somebody on one of my recent video about ideas or arguments that I heard a lot from the pro-Israel crowd that didn't click with me, and somebody in the comments said, well, I'd love to hear in your next video about what did work. And I thought about it, and I wish I had been journaling or something during this time. I think it was pretty gradual, and the more I think about it, the more that I think the answer is just that I started to be interested in becoming Jewish, and then I started meeting Jewish people. It really true, because it sort of all breaks down after that, because you meet, I went to synagogues, I met a really incredible rabbi, I met a lot of people who were deeply involved in the community and very driven and philanthropic and normal, and they were all incredibly pro-Israel, and you're like, something just starts to unsettle, and I would get sort of uncomfortable around the conversation, but I would never argue with people. I was obviously very much in the minority for having any sort of skepticism of Israel, and so I just sort of shut my mouth. And a long time went by, and I thought, I mean, something must be missing, and I just didn't. It just sort of kind of gradually started to chip away, and I thought, nobody's trying to convince me that Israel is a perfect place or a completely moral place, and nobody's trying to tell me that Jewish people are blameless for anything. And in fact, I think Blake Flayton posted about this recently, but he was like, if a Jewish person sneezes in their hand rather than their elbow, we write whole essays apologizing for it, So it's, but I guess it's just the nature of the Jewish people. But anyway, regardless, I started to it chipped away at the facade, I guess. And then October 7th happened, and I was actually off social media for a while before that. And I had all these people in my life go, "Oh my God, this is a great time to be off social media. People are being so hateful and anti-Semitic." And it made me get back on, which was maybe a bad choice. But I wanted to see what people were posting that was so bad. And of course, sure enough, it's people from my former classes. It's people I used to live with. It's people I used to go to school with. I mean, it's kind of silly looking back, but I sort of made a little announcement, I guess, or whatever. And I was uncomfortable with people assuming that I felt the same way as I previously had. So I came on there and I said something pretty watered down, pretty moderate for what I would probably say now. And I was like, "Hey, I'm converting to Judaism. October 7th has been really hard for us. I don't hate Israel anymore, essentially." And the backlash I got was immense from people in my life. And that really just signaled something to me. Like, there's something dark here, and that I guess I never saw before because it was so pervasive.
What was the disconnect for you? Like, was it just the way people were reacting to you, or was it that none of their arguments made any sort of sense?
Maybe a little bit of everything. Personally, again, I think that it sort of starts with, this is pre October 7th, that I had just meeting and being amongst regular Jewish community will already do a lot of damage to that ideology, I think. But I think the personal backlash I received, it did kind of ignite something in me. I used to work in a social services background, which I love the job, but it definitely attracts a certain, type of person. And those people in particular were just so disgusted. And they were like, "I can't believe you worked with vulnerable populations." And I thought, why? I just, so, and then again, comments like that were so laser focused in on my morality and, my quote unquote support for killing babies. I'm like, I've never said anything about that. And the fact that, saying that you were in any way, shape, or form connected to or supportive of the Jewish people or the Israeli state automatically sort of comes with this label of baby killer. It was hurtful and bizarre.
There's a saying like, tell me what you accuse other people of, and I'll tell you what you're guilty of. Like, every accusation is a confession. And especially with that baby killer remark, it's really hitting hard right now.
It's very
Um,
bizarre.
And I also want to talk to you about, you said that it's because you never came in contact with Jewish people. And we have to talk about the fact that there's only 15 million, 16 million of us in the world. Do those hateful ideologies fester and grow when there are not a lot of Jews in the area, when there's not a lot of Jews to interact with?
I think that doesn't hurt. And I was watching your video about Holocaust education too, and I thought to myself, yeah, I thought about Dara Horn's book, People Love Dead Jews, and what she has to say about the universalization of the Holocaust is really haunting. And it makes me think about my own past and probably many people that end up kind of circulating with the anti-Zionist ideology. Is that the Holocaust is very well known, and it's, of course, this big tragedy, and we all learn about it in school, but I think the universalization has been a really bad. I don't know how you fix that or what you do about that, but I think that has tinged maybe the way that, I don't know, that coupled with not really knowing Jews in your real life, coupled with the extreme and often very convincing rhetoric of the Free Palestine movement. I think all of those three things together is maybe not is powerful. It's very convincing. I look back now and I definitely think that some of my friends in elementary school, I think about their families and their last names. And I'm like, oh, okay, they probably were Jewish now that I think about it. So I think they're here in my community more than people think, but there was not good exposure, bad exposure. There was just sort of no exposure. And then I met a couple of Jewish people in college that were very pro-Israel. And I guess it just sort of seemed like oh, that's what they think, and it was always just a few of them, and I was in the Middle Eastern Studies department, and so the other voices were so loud, and all of the pro-Israel voices were only coming from Jewish students, which is just ironic now. I'm like, that would be me.
I don't know if you managed to see, but I did a whole video about how those Middle Eastern studies departments on university campuses, particularly on Ivy Leagues, have been infiltrated by professors that are receiving money from Qatar, and they're influencing it in a way that, like, if you're ever to, I mean, I'm in a group with university students from Penn. They talk
Mm.
about some of the crazy things that they're saying and how they don't put both sides on. They don't give the Jewish perspective. You're saying university really influenced you?
A big time. As far as like the in the anti-Zionist sense, I guess, But like I said, I think that growing up with, not a lot of Jewish exposure and this sort of whitewashing of the Holocaust education, and then you enter university, and yeah, it's very powerful. It's very much, I think, in my most recent video I sort of made on this, it is just in the water you drink. It is in posters everywhere. It's social clout. Everyone that you meet is reading and educated and reads the news and is up to date, and they're all free Palestine. And the only people I ever heard talk about Israel in any sort of positive way were Jewish students. And something about that, unfortunately, for me, was made it a little bit easier to sort of, like, that's their thing, and like they're missing something. They're not getting it. They're biased. Like, of course, their families have told them this, and they never made it too far in the Middle Eastern Studies department. As I got further into my education, I didn't meet as many Jewish people, which I wish would have been a red flag.
So, what do you think now about the Free Palestine movement? And what do you think when you see all these protests on campuses?
I always have a little bit of awareness that that would have maybe been me. So I have a little bit of pity. I don't really blame any particular individual student, because I think it is very easy to get wrapped up in the rhetoric. And I also remember the feeling of, like, this is a good cause. These are oppressed people. This is, me fighting back against the big guys with guns. And so I think that there can be something in a lot of these people's hearts that's maybe in the right place, but it has been so, more radicalized since October 7th. So it's hard to see myself, my former self, in this movement now, since I think it has gotten a lot more, I don't know, just ugly.
I'm fascinated by your story because I've always wondered what makes somebody that doesn't have any connections to the Middle East, that doesn't have a personal connection to this part of the world, what makes you not only take on Middle East studies, but you speak Arabic. So, what inspired you to go that route?
My mom helped me in fifth grade do a project on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and she was like, I have no idea where you got this from. I have no idea. It's just funny. I have these books on my shelf still from that time when I think I visited a mosque and a synagogue in fifth grade. It's funny to hear my mom talk about it. She's like, you were interested in this for a long time, since you were very young, and I don't know where you got that from. And actually, part of that, I don't really believe it works like this, but part of me does laugh a little bit looking back, that from a very young age I was very interested in, like, the city of Jerusalem, which, like, now I'm older and converting to Judaism, and I'm like, maybe it's like something in me that knew. I don't know, but it might have also just been growing up in, like, the post 9/11 world. Maybe I heard this talked about. I'm not really sure, to be honest, but I knew I was sort of interested in global affairs, broadly speaking, and I wanted to learn languages, and I got to college, and I thought Arabic would be so cool. I was like, Spanish, it's too similar to English. French, nobody speaks it. Who cares? I wanted to learn something new and unique. And I really enjoyed learning Arabic. I enjoyed the process. I
Are people
enjoy, like,
drawn to the uniqueness, the ethnicity of it, the how, like, exotic it is?
I think there was probably some of that. I mean, that sounds icky now, but I think I wanted, like, a different challenge. I also grew up, in high school, it was, languages were always, it was Spanish, French, or German. And I guess I was interested in cultures and languages and learning about the world. And I guess I just wanted something new. And I knew that the Middle East was a culturally rich but complicated place. And I actually had somebody ask me once, like, why didn't you pick Hebrew? And I didn't have I was like, well, more people speak Arabic,
I want to reiterate that because we are constantly being called colonizers. And I saw this comedian who said, we can't even colonize our own people. We're only 15, 16 million Jews, and not all of us speak Hebrew.
This is a funny thing, too. I look back on the education that I received through that department, and it never occurs to you, really, that Arabic is spoken from Iraq to Morocco. And the colonial narrative never really enters the conversation. It's all about Israel as the colonizer or the West. And I'm like, how did Arabic get from here to here without, and so that was something that really sort of like burst my bubble. That was one of those things. And again, it just never, it's never put that way. The narrative that's never the way it's taught, which is a problem for sure.
So you
I think
started
to your other
critical
question though
thinking.
about like how do you get involved with the
Yeah.
Palestine protests and
Yeah, when you have no personal connection to it.
I mean, again, like it really, I think being interested in languages in the Middle East or whatever will get you into the Middle Eastern Studies department. I think I had pretty like good intentions. I wasn't trying to infiltrate anything, but then you get there and the posters are everywhere and the textbooks have it and the teachers have it and your classmates who have more of a background in the Middle East are talking about it, and it just instantly sort of becomes like the thing, which is, again, I really feel like I can't look at these college students with complete disgust because I'm like, I do sort of get it. Like it just sort of instantly becomes this litmus test for, are you educated? Are you smart? Are you empathetic? Are you worldly? It's like, what's your opinion on Palestine? And it's like very much in the water. I don't know how else to explain it. And that's not an excuse. It's just a reality. I think it's very easy for someone who's intelligent and good-willed to become swept up in it. The rhetoric is so convincing and so strong.
Right after October 7th, I was on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, and I was talking to some of the Jewish students, and they were telling me that they were holding up signs saying, I'm Jewish, let's talk. And nobody would talk with them. And I remember thinking, how could there be no conversations on the campus of an Ivy League university? How does it happen that the conversation stops, that the education just ends without any critical thinking?
I remember I was at one of these, little protests, one of these little protests back in the day. I think maybe they were a little bit less tame back in the day. And I remember there's a guy who, I won't mention his name because he's connected to my university, but he's on the Canary List website. And I remember seeing him argue with, a pro-Israel protester or something, I think it was kind of one of these situations where it was like, let's talk, let's have a conversation. And I witnessed this man ask this guy, will you admit that Israel is an apartheid state that should be abolished, something like some big, long, statement that he wanted the guy to agree to before he would talk to him. And of course the guy's like, well, I don't think maybe we should. And he goes, nope, I'm not speaking to you if you won't agree to those terms first. And I mean, yeah, it's engaging with evil. It's engaging with the baby killers. It is, it's the most evil of evil. And so there's no, I mean, it would be like asking you to, I'm not saying this is the truth, but the comparison, I think, emotionally to them feels like, imagine trying to talk with Hitler in person. And Hitler's like, let's talk, let's have a conversation. I mean, they just feel like it's completely morally reprehensible. I really love...
Except the Jews are the ones that are being... characterized as Hitler, and it's so...
No, the Holocaust conversion is deep and very...
exactly.
It's bad.
And you speak a lot about this about your Instagram, which I love. You talk about the Holocaust conversion, and you talk about all the things that are happening. The thing that really got me interested, where it really resonated, you started talking about losing friends, because I think a lot of Jews can relate to you. All of a sudden, we're losing all of our friends. Oh, you don't agree that Israel is committing genocide? We're not friends. Have you even visited?
It's bad. I think you become very much a pariah, and I guess I probably have a pronounced experience of this a little bit, but I've definitely heard so many stories from Jews and non-Jews who are allied with the community in any way. It does seem like everybody has some form of story about this, but I think coming from Middle Eastern studies type background, it's such a given that everyone around you feels a very specific way about it, that to say anything to the contrary is very much to give up social status. And I don't say that to mean like, oh, you're not cool, but it makes you look like you've gone, off the derech, so to speak. Like it just they're like, who are you? What happened to you? How can you be empathetic to this side that we've all learned for so long is so evil? I sometimes hear the things coming out of my mouth, and I'm like, my 19-year-old self would have just, my jaw would have been on the floor, But
Give me an example.
just even the line that Israel has a right to defend itself, like that. And I can't really explain to you why even that would cause like this massive eye roll with people. A friend of mine was very skeptical about my skepticism of, we don't have to go too political, but like I had my reservations about both political candidates, in regards to Israel in the United States. And she just could not believe that I was not full gung-ho about Kamala Harris. And I'm like, I'm open to considering, but whatever. And I expressed some concerns, and she just thought I was so nuts for even considering this. And I'm like, I have new priorities now as a person who's, entering the Jewish community, and I have to think about these things. And I think that especially, I mean, politics in general in this country is so divisive, but I think that for me is where I've particularly felt it, like criticizing the left-leaning politics in this country at all for their, opinions on Israel.
The word is anti-Semitism.
Oh yes, that one. Yes. No, I mean, truly, I think that really offends people who are very staunchly, like the good liberal Democrats of this country. I think it's very offensive to them. And I look back at myself in 2016, and I would have been extremely offended if somebody wasn't, if a friend of mine was like, well, I don't know about the Democratic candidate because anti-Semitism, I would have been,
So why is that? It's not offensive to be anti-Semitic, but it's offensive to be called anti-Semitic.
I mean, yeah. I think that anti-Semitism is deep, it runs deep, and is complex, and doesn't fit the sort of racist model that we've all sort of learned. And so I think for people it's easier to disconnect with a little bit. I find, if I could go back, I'm trying to make a list of this actually, of like 10 or 12 things that I wish I could present to my former self or to current college students. And one of them is Einat Wilf's. She has a podcast. It's an essay, but I listen to it as a podcast. I think it's called the Anti-Semitism Mechanism, I think is what it's titled. And she talks about the ways in which this has sort of morphed throughout societies, and the way in which Israel is painted as the evil. It's the ecological evil. It's causing global warming. It's causing child death. It's causing, rape and pillaging of the world. And this is a thing that this is a story that's been told about Jews before in a different way. And that to me really spoke to something, because it does seem like in these university settings, if Israel would just go away, everything would be better. And to not, it's a shameful thing, but you don't understand that is a very old anti-Semitic trope that you're sort of internalizing through the university environment. So that's something powerful that I wish I could have known.
And I think a lot of people like myself that are older, that haven't been in the university setting for a long time, it's shocking how outwardly anti-Semitic these classes are, these professors are, the things that we're seeing, what's being taught, because we're so far removed from it. And it really is, it's like insanity.
For me, I don't ever remember anybody sitting down and going, okay, kids, today we're going to learn about why Israel's bad. I think the power comes from the interweaving it through the narratives and the other things that you talk about in whatever class it is, that again makes it, I keep saying this, but that is what makes it ultimately feel more in the air and in the water, in that it wasn't somebody trying to sit me down and convince me, but it was many smart people, many different books, many different sources, sort of interweaving a similar narrative. And so why would you question it?
The problem is, though, when all of the arguments are based on a falsehood.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that for me, again, I said this in some comment recently or whatever, but I was like, I really was not a virulent anti-Semite at all. I think that I approached it very surface level, and I thought, there are people suffering. There are people living in poor conditions. So you dig just a tiny bit deeper, and it's like, well, why are they there? Why is there all this tunnel infrastructure? Why do all these leaders live in Qatar? Why does Qatar give so much money to, it's just, so I think that for the, when I look back on myself and I see a lot of these kids, you see oppressed people in this part of the world that, it's Orientalist, frankly, but you look at these like poor people in the Middle East and they're suffering, and I think it's very easy to, if you don't dig a little bit,
Oppressed by, the question should be oppressed by whom?
well, I mean, yeah, no, I mean it's hard. I think that again, Orientalist to say, but I do think that those, Hamas and those regimes are given a sort of pass in being in the developing world and being Islamic majority areas. I don't know, something about this narrative like gives that sort of a pass. Ella Calaban talks about this being it's basically like the racism of low expectations. She talks about people who, because she's Iranian, she speaks a lot about Iran and Israel. And she's talked before about these messages she'll receive from people, speaking on Iran and like, how dare you criticize their culture, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, first of all, I'm Iranian. And second of all, this is not our culture. Like to ascribe violence and child abuse and terrorism to Middle Eastern culture is racist, And so I think that's very prevalent in like the university anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
When you talk about the racism of low expectations, Einat Vilf talks about this a lot, about how, oh, you give them a pass because they don't know any better, or because they're just like desert people or whatever.
Why don't you listen to what they're saying?
Well, first of all, that's racist in itself. But second of all, she talks about October 7th showed that they can be very sophisticated. It took decades to build those tunnels. It took decades to plan October 7th. So they can be just as forward thinking as anybody else. The question is, what are they putting their efforts into?
Oh, big time. And I haven't even really done like the deepest dive as far as like where exactly the aid all went, but to think about the amount of fundraising and to see where it got them. And it's horrible. It's sad. I feel like there could have been tourism there. It's beautiful beaches. I feel like there was a time, I know, that people went back and forth more freely and they would go to the markets in Israel and Gaza and vice versa, and I just didn't have to be this way.
So you really did a 180. And also, you said your fiance was also anti-Zionist. So how did the two of you go on this journey together to be so pro-Israel?
There's definitely a few months of sort of being on different pages and that causing weirdness in the relationship.
Who started thinking about it first?
Me. I was the one that came from no background to sort of integrating into the Jewish world. And so I think I had more, the difference between perspectives was larger for me. Whereas he grew up with sort of, this version of Judaism that he didn't really appreciate. And then he had some like crude relatives that like the way they would talk about Arabs would like leave a bad taste in his mouth. So I think that he came from a background with more hesitancy, and I think maybe for some good reason.
Nobody in his family was anti-Zionist. He just picked it up from his environment.
Well, I think he was kind of raised with a Jewishness, like he went to I think like a Jewish school when he was a very young child. And then they moved to an area with much fewer Jews, and it just sort of like tapered off probably by the time he was about 8. And then he just, it's like family things. Like he didn't always have the best relationship with some of his family members that were Jewish. I don't think it was related to being Jewish. It was just, he just didn't have a great image of it, Judaism in general, with his upbringing. And then I think leaning left politically sort of like drew him into that as he got older. And I don't think he had like the Jewish backbone to sort of see through it because he wasn't raised with it. To that point, I think that us coming together on this issue was really more for, again, just getting involved with being Jewish, and meeting people and having conversations and seeing that you can very much be a person who loves Israel and has family in Israel while you're not like a brainwashed propagandist just for that.
I don't think you realize how fascinating this story is. Like, this is huge. Like, there are
It is, I think, pretty unique, unfortunately.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's that unique to your age group. I don't want to, out you with your age, but like young people that are online a lot that maybe have minimal Jewish education are coming to these conclusions. What is unique about your story, though, is that you started thinking critically and then were able to ask the questions that brought you to a different conclusion.
I don't think I'm vastly more intelligent or anything than anyone. I think I got lucky in being interested in becoming more involved and seeing the value of Jewish life. And in my most recent video, I credit really the generosity and the strength and the traditions of Jewish people kind of showcasing, I don't know, the truth for me and some moral clarity. But it takes a lot. Like I don't think that there would have ever been one conversation I could have had as a younger person that would have just totally flipped the switch for me. I think it took a lot of like exposure and again, just meeting a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds who all had some sort of supportive outlook towards Israel. And then October 7th happening while I was in the community and sort of seeing the pain of people around me and the way that the world reacted to my new community. I think it was a very specific set of circumstances. So I don't really know how to replicate that.
What made you decide that you wanted to convert to Judaism?
I don't know exactly how to answer it. I think something just lived within me the whole time. I think that the first time that we ever went to a synagogue together, it kind of just felt like sitting in a really comfy chair. I was like, oh, this was
So
just
even after everything that you learned about the Jews and all of the propaganda you were exposed to, you still wanted to be Jewish?
Isn't that weird? I don't know how to explain that one. I also don't, again, I really don't, the narrative of the anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism thing. I've talked about this a little bit, but it is very powerful. It really makes you feel like you don't hate Jewish people. And I never had like, I never had weird feelings about like the Talmud or like I was never religiously, or I never looked at Jewish religion and thought, oh, or Jewish people or Jewish traditions. It really is very well cloaked. So maybe there's something about my story, like maybe I never got past like a certain level into like deep anti-Semitism. Maybe that was sort of why I was there. But again, I didn't know very many Jewish people. So all I hear is this one thing about the state of Israel, and then I don't ever really have too many Jews in my life to tell me otherwise. So I didn't develop a complex about the religious or social aspect of Jewish life.
You found the one Jew in your state to like get engaged to?
No, we met completely unrelated to all of this. We kind of met through like a work thing, and I know it's weird. It's a very strange set of circumstances. It definitely feels sort of divine in a type of way.
So are you doing conversion classes now?
I took a year-long class last year. Me and him tried to go every week, and I have a sort of monthly meeting with my rabbi. It almost kind of feels like a therapy session. I'm just sort of talking about my thoughts and what I'm reading and what questions I have, and I have my Beit Din next week. So So it's like, yeah, it's been, you know, it's been a long road, but I'm
Wow.
finally almost there. So
So what do you think about now when you look at the Jewish holidays and you realize every Jewish holiday is a Zionist holiday?
I have two stepkids, and I looked at them the other day about Tu B'Shvat, and I said, isn't this weird that like this has been a holiday that we've been celebrating for thousands and thousands of years, and it has to do with the agricultural cycle? And they're like, wow, yeah. And I said, so do you think that means the Jewish people have been living in that land for a really long time? And they're like, probably. And I was like, you remember this? Yes, yeah. I mean, the irony, and it's beautiful. I think that's another thing that I'm really thankful for in this whole process is I feel so much pity. I had a really good friend who has now, of course, not no longer my friend, has X'd me out, but she was Jewish, and her whole Judaism was anti-Zionism. The whole thing. I mean, it was just I never heard her speak of going to anything else aside from Free Palestine rallies with JVP, and I think about her sometimes, and I'm like, she's missing out on the cool things, like. She's missing out on Sukkot and Passover Seders and all these beautiful, rich traditions, and sort of only focusing on like this weird fringe thing. I don't know where that comes from, but I have pity, and I feel very lucky to have discovered the depth and
The
the beauty of
heart of
Judaism.
every single holiday, including Shabbat, is Zionist. It's connected to Israel. Like, how does she even? You said she celebrates. How do you even celebrate a holiday? If you're
I don't know.
anti,
I mean, I don't think she did, and that's part of the that's I guess advice I would give to, not that I'm like in a position to, but I'm thinking about, if I were to have a message for Jews, and we all already know this, but I think like just sort of having any kind of grounding in the tradition or the holidays, I think could really do a lot of good in terms of keeping your children from this ideology, even if they go to school, because there's so much depth and tradition and connection to the land that if you're involved at all, I think that's hard to miss. Whereas if you're raised with like Judaism light, or maybe you're not as involved like many of the anti-Zionist Jews that I knew were, I think it's easy to get lost and have that guilt about something.
I'm so fascinated by this, fascinated by your story. And so you always have a lot of interesting things to say. I love the video that you posted about the guy that was, I guess he was Arabic, and you're in the car and he's like yelling at you and you start yelling back in Arabic.
Well, so somebody had left a comment. I was in the car when I recorded it, but somebody had left a comment like, you take this, it was about the word intifada, and he goes, you just take this Islamic word that you don't even know what it means, and you twist it for your own purposes. And I'm like, sir, or whoever, I don't know who, but I went in depth with this language. I know what intifada means. We all know what intifada means. You don't have to study Arabic to know what intifada means, but it was just a great opportunity, as he had used the term Islamic language, and I thought, ooh, this is a good one to showcase, it's funny too, and I thought about this recently. And this should have been a thing that clicked for me back in the day, but recently in the past 6 months or so, I was at a Shabbat service one time, and somebody made a comment about, oh, if you look at Hebrew upside down, doesn't it kind of look like Arabic? Haha. And I thought, oh, it kind of does. And then somebody else chimed in and goes, oh, yeah, it kind of does. And somebody else chimed in and said, oh, yeah, I guess so. And I thought, wait a minute, have all these people studied Arabic? And I kind of went around and asked, and a lot of these people were my age, and they're like, oh, yeah, I took 2 years in college, or I studied abroad in Egypt, or I did this, or, oh, yeah, I studied blah, blah, blah. And I thought, this is a really interesting point, because I don't think anybody in like the Free Palestine circles is like, maybe I should study Hebrew to be able to converse with my opponent here or whatever. But a lot of Jewish people, I've noticed, do sort of take the time at some point or another to learn Arabic, at least in some sort of elementary type way. And I think that says something too about, it's not like we're afraid of our children learning the propaganda for studying Arabic. Like, no, go out and like learn about the people who you're in conflict with. Like, well, the more you know, the better. And I feel like on the other side, that thought process is not there.
So where do you go from here? What's next for you? You're converting.
I'm getting married It's a big season in the next couple months. I am thinking there's probably an Israel trip in my next year or so, give or take.
You have to reach out. Listen, if you're coming,
Absolutely,
you have to, yeah, you have to
absolutely,
reach out.
yes. No, I've already thought about this. I can't wait to go. I have spent some time in a Middle Eastern country where I studied Arabic, but there are parts of life in Israel that I just sort of I can't wait to like be back in that environment. It's
What
such a
are you
small country.
curious about with Israel?
I think that there's part of it that's going to be very expected because, like I said, I lived pretty extensively in one Middle Eastern country, and I've heard I see a lot of the similarities from what I've seen online. I'm like, oh, this, which is another funny thing that I laugh about. I'm like, Israel seems so Middle Eastern, and it's just funny to me to hear about like the white colonizer narrative. And I'm like, this is literally like this is a Middle Eastern country in a lot of ways. But I want to get to know the people. I feel like it could be such a warm place. I know that there's sort of this like Israeli harshness or brashness that people talk about, but I think that it being such a small country and like a small Jewish community globally, I feel like it's going to be so funny to like meet people that know people I know or like run into somebody. And I feel like Israelis are probably the type of people that are like, I just met you, but come over for dinner. Like, and I'm so pumped. I'm so excited to meet that face to face, like that type of culture, and feel like it's part of me too.
You feel like you're going to be coming home?
I think it will feel foreign, but also like home. And again, it's a weird thing that I think about sometimes. I really have had this kind of fascination with the city of Jerusalem specifically from a very young age. Like, isn't that weird? Like, where did and again, I don't like to talk about those concepts like super religiously, but it does feel like why was that there in me for so long?
Some people just have a Jewish soul.
That's what they say. So I think it's going to be great. My rabbi has been quoted as saying that we will not cancel lightly. So, and he wants people that have mostly like have never been to Israel or have only been once. So, I think if all goes well, I think that'll happen this year. So,
Oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. How common do you think your story is? Do you think your story is common or not so much?
I no, I think it's probably extremely uncommon. It's not that you can't come sort of back around from the anti-Zionist perspective, I guess, but I think that having the little to no exposure I had, being immersed in the sort of like Middle Eastern studies, not that it was all propaganda, but like, being amongst that and then becoming Jewish. And I think amidst October 7th has particularly been a really horrible and wonderful time to come into the Jewish community. It's been a very like raw time for the Jewish collective heart and again, for better or for worse, to come into the community at that time is extremely unique. And so I think probably my story is pretty rare. But I've definitely met people that I share stories in common with, and the theme of losing friends and feeling as if like your political ideology has fallen out from under your feet. Like these are all things I felt and I see written about very, very frequently. So I don't think it's entirely unique.
I mean, I think that part of it, losing friends and being politically homeless, that millions of people around the world are experiencing right now.
And that makes you feel so much. It's been a huge comfort to read about these things. Yeah, it's like we're not crazy. Like this is a collective experience, and anybody who's involved in Jewish life at all is experiencing this. And I think that there's something that is beautiful about the way that people have become more involved. Or we have people reach out to us every now and then, like, can I come do Shabbat with y'all? Like, which is funny because we don't consider ourselves super religiously involved, but to other Jews we know, we're like the most involved people, which is just funny. But the coming together of the community has been really, really incredible. So it's been nice to watch, I guess. That there's the bright side.
How much do you love Shabbat?
I work in an industry that's pretty centered around the weekends, and so Shabbat in its fullness is kind of a goal for my family in the next couple of years. But I have had a few Shabbats where I completely like turn off the phone. There was one time where we were actually on like a Jewish retreat type thing, and I didn't look at my phone for the full time, and it was really cool. I very much see how this is the most important Jewish holiday, so they say.
What's the like number one thing that you've learned over the past 16 months, would you say?
The only thing I can really think of, the like overarching theme, I guess, is that if you're Jewish, to stick to Jewish tradition and learning about Jewish tradition and participating in some way that brings you fulfillment or joy is, I think, the most important thing. You can pore over the news all day, every day, and although that's of course important, like it all comes back down to, why we're here in the first place, and it's to do Shabbat, and it's to celebrate the holidays, and it's to be with our community and our family. And I think that it, not only is the breath of life and what gives life meaning, but it's also sort of an antidote to all of the noise. Like you said, you can't celebrate the Jewish holidays without an awareness of the land, and so that'll bring you back down to the ground, and to the truth and to your community and what really matters. So I hope that if there are Jews that are feeling, lost and dazed and confused with all of the anti-Semitism and the noise, like I hope that inspires them to sort of ground themselves in tradition in some way,
So,
anyway, like something small,
is this why you think that the people that are running these like campus like protests, is this why you think they're not allowing the protesters to engage with the Jewish kids that want to talk to them? If you ask just a couple of questions, the whole house of cards comes falling down. Like the whole argument falls down. Like
That's
the Dome of the
true.
Rock is built on top of the temple.
Oh
Like
my God, that
just a
that
couple of
in
small
particular,
things.
that makes me laugh immensely. I don't think they're aware of the power that like being grounded in Jewish tradition holds. I also don't think that they view it as a house of cards, and so I think that they are very convinced of their narrative. It feels like you're engaging with the face of evil, and why would you do that? Why would you negotiate with terrorists? Or is what they're, I think, thinking. So I think they really believe it.
Well, the kids, yeah, but the organizers are really militant about not letting them chat with other people.
Yeah, I mean that's probably part of it. But again, I think that I think a lot of them probably remain pretty convinced. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, but that is a huge red flag, right?
I can't tell. Are you wearing a Jewish star or your necklace is?
Yeah, I have two. I have the chai and the.
I love that.
Yeah, they're a little set, a little sparkly.
I love it. I love it. So,
Yeah.
like, I guess like the summary is to be proud in your Judaism.
I mean, I think so. I meet other Jews and talk to them and do Shabbat every once in a while, and I think my rabbi is the coolest person. I think that having a community leader that, had I approached him in my like anti, which I never did, which maybe I'm thankful for now, but had I approached him in that, mindset of being, skeptical of Israel, he would have talked to me until he was blue in the face. And he would have talked to me calmly and respectfully. And I think that's so critical, I think my other, I guess, message, that maybe thing that I've learned, or something that I strive for in the last 16 months is, I take a Musar class, and my teacher has talked about, meeting someone who is Jewish and a good, calm person is probably the best way to combat anti-Semitism. And initially that gave me a little bit of an ick, because I'm like, oh, it's on us to be like the nice Jewish people to convince other people to not be hateful. But at the same time, again, I think about myself previously, and I thought, if I had maybe just had like a few Jewish people in my life that had talked to me somewhat regularly about this, I might have not lived in that world for so long, and so I try to think about that while operating in the world.
All right, lastly, I have to ask you about your name. Is that a name that you chose as you were converting?
It is. It is. It is sort of, parts of it are in line with my English name, but it's Michal feels grounded in Jewish tradition, and Adva is kind of the little ripple, the little wave, and that I like the imagery of that. It felt good. It felt right, and also, frankly, I thought about it for so long, and eventually, I just had to pick something. So yeah, so I like it.
You're keeping this as your Jewish name. You're not like legally changing your name, right?
I am not. No, should
Okay.
I?
No. This is what a lot of people do. They have. No, this is great. This tradition. No, just because you wrote it on the Zoom, so I was like,
Yeah, no,
wondering.
I was like, I guess I'll go by that, but yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm not changing it legally.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do that because they have their American name and then they have their Jewish name, their Hebrew name that they get like when they're at the bris or their baby naming.
Hmm.
So, have you been connecting with other people on social media? Because it seems like social media has its drawbacks, but like meeting you today has been amazing.
I know, this is really cool. There's a little community. There's like a little group chat of accounts that are kind of like ours. I mean, it's a hard. They're very active, and I love that. But it is kind of a hard group chat to keep up with. But yeah, I would like to do it more. I think that especially people that have a similar experience to mine, it's probably a fairly small community. So I would love to meet more people through that.
All right, I'm gonna just end by telling people to follow you on Instagram, Two Jews, Infinite Opinions. You've got some great stuff on there, so thank you so much.
Thank you much.